Hello, welcome to Homeschool University, where life meets learning. I'm Diana Applegate, and today we are talking about choosing homeschool curriculum for the high school years. Okay, this can be a bit of a bogey. This can be a little stressful, right? Because you've got questions maybe that you want to consider. You're not sure how to address them with curriculum. Things like what subjects are really important in the high school years? What should your student be learning? Or how about college prep? Does that factor in? Does that change the kind of curriculum you're going to choose? Maybe even you're thinking that you need to outsource the really tough subjects, right? The calculus and the chemistry. You need to use an outside teacher or an online course for that. These are all things that are going to factor into how you choose that high school homeschool curriculum, right? Well, today I'm going to help you with some really helpful advice, some practical advice, and also some reviews of some of my favorite products for the high school years. So let's get started. You probably noticed from the title of this video that we are talking very specifically about curriculum for 9th and 10th grade today. The reason that I split 9th and 10th grade and 11th and 12th grade into separate topics is because regardless of your student's post-high school plan, whether it's college or vocation or whatever it is, what you teach in 9th and 10th grade does not really change. The reason it doesn't change is because of the goal of high school. If you think about it, the real goal of high school is to turn out a well-rounded, capable, successful, satisfied life individual, right? That's the point of high school, to be able to launch your kids and know that they are going to be okay. So with that goal in mind then, 9th and 10th grade is the perfect time to shoot for a general, well-rounded education. We would define that in the past as a traditional liberal arts foundation, which then, now that I've said that, we really need to have a definition of that so we can understand it. So I've got a great quote here I'm going to put up on the screen. This is from McKenzie Perkins. She wrote this on thoughtcode.com in April of 2019. The title of the article is, "What is Liberal Arts?" A liberal arts education emphasizes the development of critical thinking and analytical skills, the ability to solve complex problems, and an understanding of ethics and morality, as well as a desire to continue to learn. In other words, this is all about learning the things that are worth knowing, the things that make us better human beings and better individuals out in the world, right? These are not these are not vocational oriented things. These are life enhancing truths, okay? So we know the goal. The goal is going to be that well-rounded education. So now, how do we put this into practice? What does that tell us about what kind of curriculum we're going to choose? Well, this is where the plan comes in. And the plan, in a very visual format, would be a scope and sequence. You may have seen a scope and sequence on like a curriculum company's website or a catalog. It's basically the idea that the company says, well, in this grade, you're going to use these materials, and in this grade, you're going to use these, and so on, right? Okay, it's just a visual way of saying, okay, where have we been and where is my student going, right? It's just a way of road mapping the whole process. So let's dive in and take a look at the scope and sequence that I like to use. This is the scope and sequence that I came up with for my high school years with my students. It's pretty simple. It's just an Excel spreadsheet. Up at the top, we start out with the subject and move on to, you got 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grades. You got your credits in the last column, which is really important in the high school years because if you're going to make a transcript for a college, they are going to want to see that. And by the way, that's part of this scope and sequence for me. These little red numbers off to the side here, these are how many credits I'm going to attach to each course in that category. So it just gives me an overview.
let's look now at 9th and 10th grade specifically, since that's what we're talking about today. So this is that 9th and 10th grade, and you can see I've actually gone in and I've attached courses to each category. So like in math, we've got Algebra 1 and Geometry. Logic, start with informal, go to traditional. English, these are actually both writing courses that we'll talk about more in a few minutes actually. Science, got some natural science to start out with, and then physical science in 10th grade. I split social studies. So we've got history and geography is one class, but another course would be principles of government. Notice that the history and geography, those courses are going to get a higher credit weight because there's going to be more work attached to them. These are more like semester classes. Foreign language, I've got that plugged in there. That can be, you know, we did Latin in 9th and 10th grade, but, you know, it could be anything. But that's a valuable thing to put into a well-rounded education. You got some fine arts in here, definitely. This is blank, vocational education. That's because 9th and 10th grade is not about that. So we're going to see that actually in 11th and 12th grade. You got some physical education, that's really important, and of course some electives, something that your student just plain wants to do. So that is my scope and sequence in a nutshell.
Now that you've got the plan through that scope and sequence, it's time to really think about choosing curriculum and the practical aspects of that. So when you go to choose that curriculum, you're going to consider really three factors. The first is you're always going to keep in mind the goal, which is a well-rounded education. You're going to look for materials that really challenge your student and ask them questions and get them to think, right? The second thing you're going to consider would be your student's learning style, okay? That's really important. How your student learns in the high school years is no different than how they learned when they were little. The difference is, though, in the high school years, that if you hand them materials now, you're expecting more independent study. And if those materials don't connect to their learning style, ooh, you are going to get a whole bunch of eye rolling and humping, right? Your student is not going to do their very best work because they just can't relate to the materials. So by the way, if you do not know your student's learning style, I highly recommend The Way They Learn by Cynthia Tobias. I'll put a link to it down below in the comments. This book is the bomb when it comes to learning styles. It's just the learning style Bible. It is. Everything you want to know in there. So the last thing that you're going to take into consideration when you're choosing curriculum is going to be, quite frankly, are you going to do seated work at home? Do you need materials for that? Are you going to do online courses? You're going to do outside coursework, maybe sending your student to someone else to learn things? Those very much influence how much curriculum you need and then what sort are you going to get. Because odds are if it's from another course provider, an outsourcing course provider, they're going to tell you what curriculum to buy and you're not going to have any choices to make there. You're not going to need to. I will say one little thing about this. In the high school years, I personally prefer to keep my high school student home as much as I can for the actual learning stage of high school, right? The reason being that I look at high school as a very formative time, a time when I have the opportunity to walk alongside someone who is very shortly going to be an adult and not here anymore. I want to walk through the materials with them. And I used to love the conversations and the discussions that we would have about the materials they were using and what they were learning, because I could have those conversations because I knew what they were doing and I had chosen the materials and was aware of what they were being presented. That's just my personal take. You know, it influences how you choose curriculum. So brings us now to the best part of this whole video, and that would be the product reviews. Yes, my 3 favorite resources for 9th and 10th grade. I know on that scope and sequence I showed a whole lot of stuff, but these are my 3 super go-tos. These are the ones that if we didn't do anything else, we would do these, okay? So here's my 3 top resources. First is 1,000 Good Books list from classicalhomeschooling.org. The second is Institute for Excellence in Writing, IEW, couple of resources from them. Ninth grade, it would be Structure and Style for Students, either level B or C. 10th grade would be Classical Rhetoric through Structure and Style, which kind of builds on what they did in ninth grade. But those are both IEW resources. And then the third one would be Introductory Logic by James Nance and Douglas Wilson. This is really a key one. So enough discussion. Let's start opening pages and really looking at these. So the first of my favorite resources for high school years is going to be something that is in my permanent high school notebook. That's right, I keep a notebook of all this stuff. This is the 1,000 Good Books list. This is actually from a website that is maintained by Christine Miller. Christine Miller, you may have heard of her before from my videos. When I did my history teaching videos a little while ago, I reviewed this book, which is one of my favorites for teaching history. So she knows literature, right? So anyway, this is the list that I would suggest you start with. Her 1,000 Good Books list goes all the way from preschool through the high school years, but this one, junior reading level, grades 7 to 9, it has plenty of challenge in it, but the nice thing about this list is it has some books that are a little more fun. The next level up, the 10 to 12s, not quite as much fun, a little more challenging. So she starts with anthologies and poetry, gets into literature. She has 120 literature titles here, okay, including one of my favorites I was delighted to see, Moonstone by Wilkie Collins. That would be one of the very first really, detective mystery novel ever written. Wilkie Collins was a contemporary of Dickens. But 120 titles here. Then she's got another 50 of advanced literature in case you run out of things to read, right? And then that brings us into the 10th to 12th grade titles, which I can say are a little more challenging, but really all of these books comprise what I would call the young person's canon. The books that everyone used to read, right? Everyone knew about them, even if they hadn't read them, they were familiar with them. That isn't the case anymore, but hey, you can change that in your homeschool. So this is my #1 resource, certainly for the high school years and definitely for grades 9 to 10, and that would be the 1,000 Good Books list. So this is my next favorite resource, which would be Excellence in Writing. That's IEW, Institute for Excellence in Writing Materials. This is the 9th grade item that I would suggest, Student Writing Intensive. You can go with a couple of groups. This guide happens to be the Group B. That's the one that I would suggest you go to if your student has never done any IEW before. If they have, you're going to want to go on to the Group C resources. Basically, it's the same material just covered in a slightly more complex way. You only need to do one of these in the 9th grade, by the way. You do not need both. So let's take a look at what's inside here. And by the way, so I want to point out, I'll put links to everything in the comment section down below this video so you don't have to take notes. So the first thing he puts in here is a wonderful help. It's a suggested course schedule, i.e. lesson plan, right? The week, which day you're on in the week, and then he's giving you the lesson you're working on and what each day your student would do. Oh my gosh, you don't even have to plan this out. I also love, he puts in here a scope and sequence, which lists not just the lesson, but the disc that the lesson is on, and then what is in the lesson and what sources you're using. By the way, you don't have to buy this course on DVD anymore. He has a new thing called Forever Streaming. So literally, you're just pulling it up in a computer format. So this is an average lesson. This is, like I say, Group B. You've got the titles of the objects that are being taught in the lesson, and then you've got, this is great, timestamps for where each thing is, so that if you have to stop and restart, no problem, you know exactly where you're at. So he walks you through the lesson, which is very straightforward. It's the same lesson that he's teaching. It's just giving you a little more background on it for when you go through it with your student later. And then we get into the handouts. This is actually what he's putting up on the whiteboard in the lesson. There's more of that. And then the source materials. You don't even have to find the source materials he's working off of. And by the way, this is a great thing about IEW. Your student does not dive into writing things off the top of their head. No, they learn to write one piece at a time. He even includes these great checklists. So your child knows that they've put in everything that they were supposed to do on that particular item. I have taught using IEW for many years in the homeschool community. I'm actually an IEW certified constructor. I would not teach writing with anything else. These things are the very best. So that's 9th grade. Let's move up into 10th grade here. For 10th grade, you're going to want to move on to Classical Rhetoric through Structure and Style, also by IEW. These are wonderful writing lessons that are geared for the older student. You get into all kinds of topics here, including things like note-taking. You've got thesis, confirmation, and refutation, which I personally love because that is arguing in a written style. Can you say Twitter or Facebook? Yeah. And then you also have formal critique, which is very valuable if your student's going off to college. So this book, what makes it really unique is he does all of his writing lessons based on classical literature. So you start right off the bat with working on something that Socrates wrote, right? He gives you the assignment, just like you would expect. You've got a nice checkoff list for your student to use. It's really self-contained. This is a great way to complete your child's writing education, because I'll tell you what, by the time you get to 10th grade, to 11th grade rather, you want them doing the writing. So get that instruction done at a very high level. This is going to be the way to do it. So my third and last favorite resource for homeschool high school, 9th and 10th grade, would be Introductory Logic. That's right. This is written by James Nance and Douglas Wilson. This comes in the student handbook. You also have the teacher's edition and the optional DVD that you can get where Mr. Nance is actually teaching the lessons from the student handbook on a DVD. So it's really great if you have a very auditory learner. Someone else is saying it rather than reading it. So let's look first here at the teacher's edition. This is a helpful little item, let me tell you. This thing gives you the full lesson, right, that the student is doing, but it also gives you teacher's notes in front of that on exactly what they're learning, gives you the pages. I actually went through and figured out which of the DVD sessions it's on as well. But it gives you all of the teaching instructions that you need to help your student. And then your student, he's got the same lesson, so you can walk through it with them. And then it's got the exercise completely filled out with all of the answers, right? So you go to the student handbook, which is this here, and looking at that from the student's point of view, you have the lesson itself, which has got, your key points, it's got highlights, it's got bullet points. It is not super difficult to read. It does require a certain amount of concentration, definitely. And then you get to the exercises. And the exercises then is where your student gets to practice what they just learned, right? And then you've even got, at the end of a unit, you've got review questions. People often ask me, okay, why is this one of my favorite resources? Why teach logic? Well, I got to tell you, you teach logic because it's the art of thinking well. This is important, especially in our day and age when so much information is thrown at us all at the same time, right? Okay, thinking well, thinking critically, very important skills. This is a great way to do it, a great resource. That's what I'm going to leave you with as far as what to use to teach. That's it for today. Remember, when you're approaching choosing homeschool curriculum for the high school years, it's really all about the prize, right? It's all about the end goal. It's about creating and fostering a well-rounded individual, someone who is grounded in all of the good things that this world has to offer. So join me here next Wednesday for Homeschool High School Part 5, that's right, which will be choosing curriculum for 11th and 12th grade. Yes, spoiler alert, more product reviews on the horizon for that. And be sure, if you'd like to see the 3 videos that have come before this in my high school series, 1, 2, and 3, would be on my Homeschool High School playlist, and a link to that will show up at the very end of this video. So I'm going to leave you today with my 3 key strategies that I have here at Homeschool University. The first is to be practical. Common sense is a free gift. It's available to everybody. Number 2, be purposeful. Pray with and for your children and for your homeschool. And the last one is be positive. You can do this because you are amazing.
Hey now, take a step outside and seize the day.